The desert doesn't keep secrets. It burns them into the open. For Martha Coltrane, a widow clinging to a failing ranch in the Arizona Territory, the secret she finds is a small crying child hidden in the wreckage of a wagon that wasn't hers. He is a Navajo boy, and he is the key to a conspiracy of water greed and the unsolved murder of her own husband. But she is trapped, her own wagon sabotaged, her food running low. What happens next is not a miracle, but an act of war built in a single night by a people she was told to fear. The silence of the high desert was a living thing. It had weight. It pressed against the thin cotton of Martha Coltrane's dress and filled the empty chair across her table, the one her husband Frank had built from solid juniper. It had been 6 months since the rock slide that crushed him. An accident, Sheriff Brody had called it, his eyes avoiding hers. 6 months of the silence growing teeth. Martha's ranch, the Coltrane claim, was a defiant speck of human hope against the towering red rock mesas near Canyon de Chelly. It was a place of brutal beauty, but the beauty didn't pay the bills at Abernathy's Mercantile in Perdition's Fork, and it didn't fill the pantry. Frank had believed in this land. He'd seen the rich soil in the low-lying basin and claimed the dry creek bed held a secret. Now all Martha saw was dust and debt, and she saw Bartholomew Bart Higgins. Higgins owned the sprawling Double H Ranch that bordered her land to the south and west. He'd made no secret of his desire for her basin. He'd offered a pittance for the claim 2 weeks after Frank was buried, his large, fleshy face arranged in a mask of sympathy. "A woman alone can't work this land, Martha," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "It's God's mercy to take my offer." She'd shown him the door, and in return, he'd shown her his power. The hands at the Double H no longer helped with her strays. The trail to town suddenly had a new locked gate, forcing her on a 3-hour detour. Today that detour felt particularly long. The sun was a hammer, beating the last moisture from the air. Her wagon, her only wagon, rattled over the rutted track, the wheels crying for grease she couldn't afford. She was down to her last bag of flour and a handful of beans. This trip to Perdition's Fork was not a luxury, it was a plea for credit. Mr. Abernathy, a man built of wire and twine, polished the counter with a stained rag as she entered. The store smelled of coffee beans cured leather and the sour scent of the town's judgment. "Mrs. Coltrane," he nodded, not unkindly, but not warmly. "Mr. Abernathy, I need flour, salt, and perhaps some cartridges for the Winchester." His eyes flicked to the ledger book by his elbow. "The account, Martha. Mr. Higgins was in yesterday. Paid his bill. Mentioned he might be expanding." The implication hung in the air, thick as the dust. "Your credit is dead because your neighbor is alive." "Frank's account was good," she said, her voice tighter than she wanted. "Frank's gone," Abernathy said softly. "I'll give you the cartridges. On the house. But the provisions, I can't." Shame burned her neck hotter than the sun. She took the small box of shells, nodded once, and walked out, the silence of the townfolk at her back. The ride home was a blur of humiliation and rising panic. She was trapped. Higgins had cut her off. She'd be starved out by winter. The dry creek bed mocked her. Frank's secret was just a fool's dream. She was so lost in her own despair that she almost missed it. Rounding a tight bend of sandstone where the trail dipped into a shallow arroyo, she saw it. At first it was just a shape that didn't belong, a slash of broken wood against the red rock. She pulled her wagon to a halt, the mules stamping nervously. She grabbed the Winchester. It was a wagon, or what was left of it. It was smaller than hers, crudely made more of a cart. One wheel was shattered. The axle snapped. A bolt of calico cloth was tangled in a greasewood bush, fluttering like a dying bird. Sacks of corn and piñon nuts were split open, their contents scattered in the dust. But there was no blood, no bodies, just a profound, violent emptiness. "Hello," she called out, her voice swallowed by the canyon. The mules snorted, their ears pinned back. They smelled something. Not a coyote, not a mountain lion. They smelled people. Martha slid from the wagon seat, the rifle heavy in her hands. She circled the wreckage. The tracks told a story. 2 shod horses, white men, had come upon the cart. There were scuffle marks in the dirt. The cart had been deliberately destroyed, the axle hacked with an axe. This wasn't a robbery. It was an execution of property. And then she heard it. A sound so small, it was almost part of the wind. A thin, reedy whimper. She froze. It came from a narrow split in the rock wall, 20 yards away, obscured by a curtain of dry scrub oak. "Who's there?" she said, raising the rifle. The whimpering hitched, then stopped. Slowly, Martha lowered the rifle and laid it on the ground. She held her hands up, palms forward. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm alone." She took a step, then another. She pulled back the brittle branches. In the sliver of shadow, 2 wide black eyes stared back at her. It was a boy, no older than 5 or 6. He was wearing only a breechcloth and worn moccasins. His black hair was matted with dust, his face streaked with tears and dirt. He was Navajo. He was clutching something in his fist, a small leather pouch on a string. He stared at her, vibrating with a terror so deep it had gone silent. "Oh, Lord," Martha whispered, the heat and her hunger and her shame vanishing, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The boy's family had been here. They had been attacked, and they had hidden their child. "It's all right," she said, her voice rough. "They're gone. It's all right." She reached a hand out. The boy flinched, pressing himself so hard against the rock he seemed to merge with it. "Come on, child," she urged, her heart cracking. "The sun's going down. They'll be back, or worse." She waited. 1 minute. 5. The shadows in the arroyo turned from grey to purple. Finally, with a shudder that shook his entire small body, the boy took 1 step forward, then another, and collapsed into the dust at her feet, too exhausted to be afraid. Martha scooped him up. He weighed almost nothing. He smelled of piñon smoke, sweat, and pure terror. She carried him to her wagon, laid him on her empty flour sacks, and threw a canvas tarp over him. She looked back at the wrecked cart. She knew with a certainty that settled in her bones that she had just picked up a burning stick from a fire she didn't understand, and Bart Higgins was the one who held the torch. The Coltrane ranch house was little more than a fortified cabin, built half-dug into the side of a small hill, a hogan, as Frank had jokingly called it, respecting the Navajo style. Tonight, it felt like a tomb. Martha laid the boy on her own narrow cot, the one she'd moved to the main room after Frank's death. The boy had not made a sound since she'd lifted him. He hadn't fought her, hadn't spoken. He simply watched her with those vast, dark eyes. He was in shock. She brought a basin of water, precious water from her dwindling cistern, and a clean rag. She gently washed the grime from his face and arms. He had bruises the shape of a man's large hand on his upper arm. He flinched when the water touched it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "My name is Martha. Martha Coltrane." The boy just stared. He was still clutching the leather pouch. His small, raw knuckles were white. "You're safe here," she said, knowing it was a lie. No one was safe here. She barred the heavy door. She checked the simple shutters on the 2 windows, slotting the wooden bars into place. The cabin was plunged into near darkness, lit only by a single kerosene lamp that cast looming, dancing shadows. She found an old shirt of Frank's, one that had shrunk in the wash, and helped the boy into it. It hung on him like a tent. She offered him a cup of water, and he drank it greedily, his eyes never leaving hers. Then she tried a piece of stale bread. He chewed it slowly, methodically, as if the act of eating was a puzzle he was relearning. She sat in Frank's chair, the Winchester across her lap. The silence was back, but it was different. It was shared. She tried to piece it together. A Navajo family attacked. Why their few provisions weren't worth the violence. It had to be something else. Higgins. He hated the Navajo called them vermin who stole water. But this was too direct, too brutal. This was personal. Her eyes drifted to the small fireplace, to the loose stone in the hearth Frank had told her about. Her gaze snapped back to the boy. He had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his breathing falling into the shallow rhythm of sleep. But his hand was still fisted around the pouch. Martha quietly went to the hearth. She worked the stone free. Behind it was a small, hollowed-out space. Inside sat Frank's tin lockbox. She pulled it out. It was light. She opened it. It was empty. She stared at it, her blood turning to ice. Frank's ledger, his drawings, his survey maps, everything he'd been working on, the secret of the ranch, was gone. She had assumed in her grief that she had simply misplaced it, that it was in a trunk or a drawer. But she knew Frank. This was his safe place. It hadn't been a rock slide. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. Frank's accident. He was a master of rock and fuse, a miner before he was a rancher. He wouldn't have been caught by a simple rock slide. Someone had been here. Someone had searched the cabin after he died. Someone had taken that ledger. A sharp knock echoed through the door, rattling the bar. Martha jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. The boy was instantly awake, his eyes wide with panic. She put a finger to her lips and grabbed the Winchester, leveling it at the door. "Mrs. Coltrane," a voice drawled, an oily, familiar voice. "You in there, Martha? Lyle Duggan, Higgins's foreman, a man with dead eyes and a gun he wore tied low." "What do you want, Mr. Duggan?" Martha called out, her own voice sounding thin. "Just checking on you. Saw your wagon on the ridge. Looked like you were riding heavy, but then—" No provisions. A soft, mocking chuckle. Boss was worried. Thought maybe you'd finally seen sense. He was probing. He knew she'd been to Abernathy's. He knew she'd been refused. "I'm fine, Mr. Duggan. You can tell Mr. Higgins I'm not in need of his concern." Another pause. The scrape of a boot on the stone step. "That's a shame. A real shame." His voice was closer now, right against the wood. "See, the boss is a generous man. But his patience, it ain't endless. This land, it needs a strong hand. Not well, you get my meaning." He was trying to scare her. He was succeeding. "Good night, Mr. Duggan." She heard him spit. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Coltrane. Holding on to something that ain't yours. It's a good way to get hurt." His footsteps receded. She waited, her muscles screaming with tension, until she heard the faint whinny of his horse fading into the distance. She slumped against the wall, her legs weak. The boy had pressed himself into the corner of the cot, trying to disappear. "He's gone," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. She looked at the boy, then at the empty lockbox. "Holding on to something that ain't yours." Duggan's words echoed. The wrecked wagon, the missing ledger, the boy. It was all one story. She went to the cot. The boy's hand had relaxed in his sleep, the leather pouch now loose. Gently, so gently, she slipped the string from around his neck. He didn't stir. She held the pouch. It was old, soft deerskin, worn smooth. She pulled the drawstring. Inside was not a trinket or a stone. It was a piece of paper folded many times. She opened it. It was a map, crudely drawn but clear. It showed the canyons and mesas. It showed her own claim. It showed Higgins' land. And it showed a series of symbols, Navajo symbols for water, snaking through the dry creek bed on her property and originating from a spring deep inside Higgins' land. This was Frank's secret. He hadn't found it. The Navajo had. This was a map to the hidden springs, the lifeblood of the entire valley, and Bartholomew Higgins was damning it. He wasn't just starving her out. He was stealing the water from the entire basin from her and from the Diné. Frank must have found out. He must have made contact with the boy's family. He was going to expose Higgins, and for that, he was murdered. The boy in her cot wasn't just a survivor. He was a messenger, and the men who had attacked his family weren't just thugs. They were hunters, and they were hunting for this map. Dawn broke over the high desert painting, the sky in hues of apricot and lavender that felt like a cruel joke. Beauty meant nothing when you were marked for death. Martha had not slept. She sat in Frank's chair, the map spread on the table, the Winchester in her lap. The boy whom she had started to think of as Taji, a name she'd heard Frank use for the wild turkeys that roamed the canyons, was still asleep. It was the sleep of the profoundly shattered. The map was her proof, but it was also her death warrant. Duggan's visit wasn't a check-in. It was a reconnaissance. He'd be back. Higgins wouldn't risk her talking, not now. Her encounter with Abernathy confirmed she was desperate. Her empty wagon confirmed she was weak. She had to run. She had to get the boy to safety to his people. And she had to get this map to the territorial marshal in Prescott, the only man Sheriff Brody couldn't buy. But that required a wagon and supplies. She rose, her joints cracking, and moved to the pantry. It was as she'd feared. A handful of coffee, half a sack of beans, and the last of the flour. Not enough for a day, let alone the 100-mile journey to Prescott. First, the boy's people. They would be somewhere in the Canyon de Chelly, a place the U.S. Army had learned to fear and respect. If she could get him there, they would protect him. They might even help her. She went to the small lean-to stable beside the cabin. Her 2 mules stood patiently, and there under the shelter was her wagon, her lifeline. She walked to it, her stomach tightening with a new specific dread. Duggan. He had been here. He wouldn't have just knocked on the door. She ran her hand along the heavy oak axle of the rear wheel. It felt sound. She checked the other, and then she saw it. On the front axle, tucked away where she wouldn't see it unless she was looking for it, was a fresh cut. A deep, saw-toothed groove cut almost 3/4 of the way through the wood. It was packed with mud and grease to disguise it. It wouldn't break on the flat. It would hold just long enough for her to get to the steep, rocky decline of the old mesa trail, the only way out other than the main road. It was designed to fail catastrophically, to send her the wagon and anyone in it plunging into the arroyo. A second accident to silence the widow Coltrane. The completeness of their malice stunned her. Higgins and Duggan hadn't just left her to starve. They had set a trap. They wanted her to run. She leaned against the wagon wheel, the rough wood biting into her palms. She was boxed in, trapped on her own land with a dying pantry, a sabotaged wagon, and a silent child who held the secret to a water war. She slid to the ground, the dust settling on her dress. For a single crushing moment, she gave in. The grief for Frank, the fear, the isolation, it all flooded her. She was going to die here. This beautiful, terrible land Frank loved would be her grave. A small sound broke her despair. Taji was standing in the cabin doorway, wrapped in Frank's oversized shirt. He was watching her, his face devoid of expression. He had seen her break. She wiped her face with a dusty hand, ashamed. "It's nothing," she said, her voice a croak. "It's the wagon. It's broken." He walked toward her, his bare feet silent on the packed earth. He looked at her then, at the wagon. He walked the perimeter of it, his small hands running over the wheels, the sideboards. He was a child, but he moved with a strange, adult gravity. He stopped at the front axle. He stared at the cut, his head tilted. He scraped at the grease with a small fingernail, revealing the raw, splintered wood beneath. He looked up at her. He didn't need to speak English to understand. He knew what sabotage looked like. He had seen it just yesterday. Martha stood brushing the dust from her skirt. "They've trapped us, Taji," she said the name, feeling right on her tongue. "Higgins, the men who broke your family's cart. They did this." Taji's gaze was unsettling. He looked past her toward the high eastern mesa, where the sun was now cresting, bathing the world in gold. He seemed to be listening. "I have to hide the map," Martha said more to herself. She went back inside, folded the precious paper, and slipped it into the leather pouch. She retied it around the boy's neck, tucking it deep beneath the shirt. "Don't you let anyone take this. Do you understand me?" "No one." He met her gaze, and for the first time he nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. "Good, now we have to wait." But waiting was a death sentence. As if he had read her mind, Taji turned and walked away from the cabin. He didn't run. He walked with purpose, heading straight for the dry creek bed that marked the edge of her property. "Taji, wait! Where are you going?" Martha cried, panic rising. "It's not safe." He didn't look back. He scrambled down the rocky bank and disappeared into the tangle of salt cedar and mesquite. "No, come back!" She ran after him, grabbing the Winchester as she flew out the door. She half fell, half slid down the bank, her heavy skirts catching on thorns. "Taji!" She reached the bottom. The creek bed was empty. He was gone. She stood alone, the rifle in her hand, the silence of the desert roaring in her ears. He had run off. He had left her. She was alone again, truly alone. She had failed him, just as she had failed Frank. She sank to her knees in the dry sand, the sabotaged wagon behind her, the empty pantry at her back, and the vast hostile land stretching out in every direction. The trap was sprung. Martha didn't know how long she stayed in the creek bed. The sun crawled higher, baking the sand around her. Her despair was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. The boy was gone, vanished into the wilderness. He had probably gone to find his family, or to die trying. A fool. She was a fool to think she could protect him. She was a fool to think she could fight Bart Higgins. She was a fool to think Frank's dream was anything but a headstone. She forced herself to stand. Her duty now was to her own death. She would not let Duggan and Higgins have the satisfaction of a wagon accident. She would wait for them in the cabin. She would bar the door, and she would use the cartridges Abernathy had given her. She would die on her own terms, on her own land. She began the grim climb, back up the bank. As her head crested the rim, she froze. They were there, standing by her sabotaged wagon. Not Duggan, not Higgins, Navajo. There were 5 of them, materializing from the landscape as if they were formed of the red dust itself. They were not the warriors of campfire stories. They were lean, hard men, their faces etched with sun and worry. They carried bows, a few old rifles. They stood in perfect assessing silence, their eyes on her broken wagon. Martha's hand tightened on her Winchester. She raised it slowly. One of the men, an older man with silver hair, braided in the traditional style, raised his hand, palm out. He said nothing, and then from behind the wagon, Taji emerged. He walked past the men and stood beside the oldest one, looking at Martha. He was safe. He hadn't run from her. He had run for her. "You are the one," the old man said. His voice was like stones rolling in a dry wash. His English was slow, deliberate. "You are the widow Coltrane." Martha lowered the rifle, her heart hammering. How? How do you know my name? The child Taji has told us. Your husband, Frank Coltrane, was our friend." The word stunned her. "You knew Frank? He came to us. He sought our counsel. He understood the water. And he understood the thief." The old man's eyes, dark and ancient, swept over her meager ranch. "He told us of his secret. But it was our secret. The secret of the Dine. The water belongs to the earth, not to one man." "Higgins," Martha breathed. "He's dammed the spring, the one on the map." Taji pointed to the pouch, still tucked in his shirt. The old man nodded. "The boy's uncle drew that map for your husband. It was the proof he needed for your white law. They were bringing food to your husband, corn beans, so he could make the journey to Prescott. They did not arrive." "They were attacked," Martha said, her voice raw. "Duggan, Higgins' man." "We know Duggan," the old man said, and a shadow passed over his face. "Taji is the son of my daughter. His family is gone. He is all that is left of that line." The weight of the boy's trauma, his silence, suddenly became almost unbearable. He was not just a survivor. He was an orphan, the last witness. He led you here," Martha said, gesturing to the boy. "He came to our winter camp. He told us the white woman had given him shelter. He told us she was trapped. He told us her wagon was broken by the same evil." The old man stepped forward, his eyes falling on the deep, malicious cut in the axle. He touched the raw wood with one finger. His name, he said, was Hostin Tso. It meant big man, but he was not large, just possessed of a powerful gravity. He was an elder, a leader. He looked from the axle to Martha. His gaze was not one of pity. It was an assessment, a weighing. "You saved the boy," he stated. "You gave him water and a roof. You kept the map safe." I did nothing," Martha said. I was giving up." "No." Hostin Tso said, a spark in his dark eyes. "You didn't give the boy to Duggan. You didn't give him the map. You barred your door, and you followed the child into the creek. You are still here. That is not nothing. That is Hojo, walking in the right way." He turned to the other men and spoke in the rapid flowing cadence of the Dine. They nodded. One of them, a younger, broad-shouldered man, disappeared over the ridge. The other three fanned out, taking up positions on the high ground around the ranch, their eyes scanning the horizon. They were sentries. What are you doing?" Martha asked. Hostin Tso turned back to her. He looked at the broken wagon, then at the dying sun, then back at her. "Bartholomew Higgins builds a dam of wood and stone to steal the water," he said, his voice quiet. "We will build a wagon of wood and iron to take it back." You can't," Martha stammered. "The axle is thick oak. It needs a blacksmith tools I don't have. It would take a week." Hostin Tso smiled, a rare, thin smile that barely creased his face. "Your husband was our friend. You saved my grandson. The Dine do not forget a debt, and we do not forget a crime." He looked up at the sky. "We have one night. The enemy will come with the morning sun. We must be ready." As he spoke, a new sound filled the air, a low rumble, the sound of movement of life. Martha looked toward the eastern mesa. Over the ridge, a slow, steady procession was appearing. It was the rest of Hostin Tso's people. It was not a war party. It was families. Women leading pack horses, children herding goats, other men carrying tools. They moved with a quiet, efficient purpose, descending into her small basin as if they had always belonged there. They brought wood. They brought rawhide. They brought strength. They were here to honor the debt. They were here to fight a common enemy, and they were going to rebuild her wagon. The desert night came on fast, a blanket of cold indigo thrown over the hot red earth. The stars in the Arizona territory were not small distant specks. They were holes punched in the sky, spilling cold ancient light onto the Coltrane claim. That light illuminated a scene of impossible focused industry. Hostin Tso's people, perhaps 30 in all, had transformed Martha's desolate yard into a workshop. A fire was built, not a large, wasteful bonfire, but a series of small hot pits, fueled by dry juniper. The smell of pinyon smoke, which had always been the lonely scent of the high desert, now became the smell of community. Martha stood useless by her cabin door for only a moment. A woman with a kind, weathered face, draped in a brightly woven blanket, approached her. She held out a piece of fry bread hot from the fire and a small, cured strip of dried meat. Martha took it, her hand shaking. The woman nodded, smiled, and returned to her work, tending a pot that now simmered over a fire. Taji, who had been silent for so long, was now chattering quietly to the other children who had accepted him back into their fold without question. They were not playing. They were working, tasked with gathering brush-holding tools and running water. Hostin Tso was directing the men at the wagon. They had not tried to patch the sabotaged axle. They had dismissed it with a single, sharp word. Instead, they were replacing it. "Frank's tools," Martha said, suddenly remembering. She ran to the lean-to to the heavy chest her husband had guarded so jealously. She threw it open. Saws, hammers, heavy augers, chisels a block, and tackle a blacksmith's and a carpenter's dream. She carried the tools out. The men stopped their eyes, widening at the quality of the steel. Hostin Tso ran a reverent hand over a heavy draw-knife. "Your husband was a builder," he said. "Show me what to do." Martha said, her voice no longer weak. For the next 8 hours they worked. This was not a repair. This was a resurrection. The Navajo men were masters of wood. They had brought a seasoned log of mountain oak hauled on a travois. With Frank's saws they shaped it, measuring not with rulers, but with lengths of string and the span of their hands. They worked with a rhythmic efficiency, their movements economical, their voices low. Martha worked alongside them. She heated rivets in the fire, holding them steady, while a man named Dine Tsosie Slim Man hammered them home. Her hands, soft from months of disuse, were quickly rubbed raw. They blistered, broke, and bled. She ignored the pain, wrapping them in strips of cloth. The women were reinforcing the wagon bed. They used the rawhide they'd brought, soaking it until it was pliable, then lashing it across the sideboards, reinforcing the joints. As it dried, it would shrink and harden, turning the simple supply wagon into something akin to an ironclad. They re-greased the wheels using a pot of pine pitch and tallow one of the women had prepared. They checked every bolt, every board. They didn't just fix what was broken, they improved what was whole. Martha felt a profound shift inside her. The silence she had feared was gone, replaced by the thump of the hammer, the shush of the saw, the quiet murmur of the Dine language. This was not the work of strangers. It was a bargain struck without words. She had offered sanctuary, and they were offering survival. She learned more about Frank in that single night than she had in a year of marriage. "Your husband," Hostin Tso said, resting for a moment, "he would bring tobacco. He would sit by our fire. He did not talk of owning the land. He talked of living with it. He saw the way Higgins choked the high springs. He knew it was poison for us and poison for him. He was a man who saw the whole circle. The pieces clicked into place. Frank's strange absences, his sudden interest in the geology of Higgins' land, his missing ledger. He hadn't just been a rancher, he'd been an investigator, an ally. As the first pale hint of grey appeared in the east, the work was done. The men lowered the wagon bed onto the new perfectly fitted axle. The wheels were secured. The wagon stood tall, solid, and stronger than it had ever been. It looked formidable. Hostin Tso walked its perimeter, his hand dragging along the newly hardened rawhide. He nodded, satisfied. "It is done," he said. Martha looked at the wagon, then at her own hands, black with grease and blood. She looked at the faces around her, tired but resolute. They had taken her symbol of defeat and failure, and with their own hands and Frank's tools had rebuilt it into a chariot of war. They had done more than rebuild a wagon. They had rebuilt her. Just as the sun's rim breached the horizon, a cry came from one of the sentries on the ridge. "They come," he called in English for her benefit. "3 riders, from the south." Dugan. Hostin Tso's face hardened. "The battle for the water begins," he said. "Get the map. Get in the wagon." The women and children melted back into the canyons, their work done. Hostin Tso and his men, now nearly a dozen, armed and ready, fanned out into the rocks above the cabin. Tazi ran to Martha. He did not hide. He grabbed her bloody hand. "Go," she told him, pushing him toward the stable. "Hide in the hayloft. Do not come out, no matter what." He hesitated, his dark eyes pleading. "Go, Hoju," she said, using the one word she had learned. He scrambled into the stable. Martha picked up the Winchester, checked the load, and walked to the front of her cabin. She stood beside the rebuilt wagon, its wet pitch glittering in the new dawn light, and waited for her husband's murderers. The 3 riders came in, slow not with the urgency of a raid, but with the lazy arrogance of buzzards arriving at a kill. Lyle Duggan was in the lead, flanked by 2 hard cases from the Double H men, known in town as the brothers Galt Paxton and Wade. They reined in 20 yards from the cabin, their horses nervous, sensing the unseen presence in the rocks. Duggan's eyes took in the scene. He saw Martha standing alone, her dress stained with grease, the Winchester held steady at her hip. He saw the wagon. His mouth, which had been set in a sneer, fell open. "What in the—" He squinted, disbelieving. The wagon was whole. Not just whole, but stronger. "Where's the— How— You're trespassing, Mr. Duggan," Martha said, her voice clear and cold in the morning air. It didn't tremble. She was surprised to find she wasn't afraid. She was furious. Duggan's eyes darted from the wagon to the rocks, then back to her. The smoke from the night's fires still hung in the air. He wasn't stupid. "Looks like you had a party." "Mrs. Coltrane," he drawled, recovering. "Got yourself some redskin help. Higgins ain't gonna like that, associating with vermin." "Mr. Higgins's preferences are no concern of mine," Martha said. "You have 10 seconds to get off my land. You and these 2 vultures you brought with you." Paxton Galt chuckled a dry, ugly sound. "Listen to her. Thinks 'cause she got her cart fixed, she's queen of the mesa." "Shut up, Pax," Duggan snapped. His gaze was fixed on Martha. "They built it for you, which means they're here. They're watching." He raised his voice. "You hear me, you skulkers? This ain't your land. This is white territory." A single arrow thwacked into the dust, 5 feet from his horse's head. The horse screamed and reared. Duggan fought the animal, his face pale with rage. "That's how you want it." "Fine." His eyes narrowed, focusing back on Martha. "Higgins sent me for one last offer. $500 for the claim. Cash. You take it and you ride out. You ride out today. My price is your boss in chains, Martha retorted, for the murder of Frank Coltrane. The air went still. Duggan's mask of false geniality dropped, completely revealing the killer beneath. You're making this hard, Martha. Real hard. Frank was an accident, just like you're about to be. Was it an accident when you hacked my axle, or was that just practice? Duggan smiled. It was a terrible sight. You talk too much. His eyes darted past her toward the stable, a flicker of movement, Taji peering from the hayloft. Well, well, Duggan whispered, his gaze locking on the boy. Look what we have here. The little map keeper. We've been looking all over for you, boy. He had been there. He was the one who had attacked the boy's family. So that's it, Duggan said, his voice full of sudden greedy understanding. You found the boy, you found the map, and you called your little red army. You think they can protect you? He slowly unbuttoned his duster, revealing the butt of his pistol. Give me the boy, Martha, and the map. You do that, and I'll let you live. Higgins just wants the water. He'll let you walk away. No, Martha said. Last chance, Duggan snarled. I said no. Duggan drew his gun. Wrong answer. He didn't fire at Martha. He fired at the stable, the bullet splintering the wood just inches from where Taji was hiding. The boy screamed. Get the boy! Duggan yelled at the Galt brothers. Paxton and Wade spurred their horses forward, but they had forgotten about the wagon. Martha raised her Winchester, but she didn't fire at the men. She fired at the ground in front of their horses. The shot echoed like a cannon in the small basin. The horses panicked, rearing and shying. At the same moment, Hosteen So's voice rang out from the rocks. Dine now! Arrows rained down, not at the men, but at their mounts. An arrow sunk deep into the rump of Paxton's horse. The animal screamed, bucked him from the saddle and bolted. Another arrow pierced the saddlebag of Wade's horse. It was chaos. The Galt brothers were unhorsed, scrambling for cover, firing blindly into the rocks. Duggan, a more experienced fighter, ignored the arrows. He spurred his horse directly at Martha, firing as he came. The bullet plucked at her sleeve, the force of it spinning her around. She lost her balance and fell hard against the rebuilt wagon. The Winchester skidded out of her reach. Duggan was on her, his horse rearing his face, a mask of triumph. He leveled his pistol at her head. It's over, widow. You are right, said Hosteen So's voice, now directly behind him. Duggan froze. He turned his pistol swinging. Hosteen So was standing on the roof of Martha's cabin, a bow in his hand, an arrow aimed directly at Duggan's heart. You move, you die, the elder said. Duggan's eyes were wide. He was trapped. The Galt brothers were pinned down by arrow fire from the ridges. Drop it, Mr. Duggan, Martha said, pushing herself up. She retrieved the Winchester. Drop it, or my friend will put an arrow through your black heart. With a curse that fouled the clean morning air, Lyle Duggan let his pistol fall to the dust. Tell your men to stop firing, Martha commanded. Galt Wade, hold your fire, it's a bust, Duggan yelled. The shooting stopped. The Galt brothers emerged, their hands high. The other Navajo men walked down from the rocks surrounding them. Duggan glared at Martha, his eyes promising murder. You've just signed your own death warrant, lady. Higgins owns the sheriff. He owns this whole valley. You think this rabble can stop the law? He'll have the cavalry on you for this. Maybe, Martha said, her mind racing. Duggan was right. They had won the skirmish, not the war. They couldn't stay here. Higgins would be back, and he'd bring the law. The wagon, she said to Hosteen So. It's not just for supplies. It's for the trip to Prescott. Hosteen So nodded. We know, but not just for you. He looked at Duggan and his men. We must show the white law what real justice is. He gave a series of commands in Diné. His men brought ropes. "What are you doing?" Duggan demanded, his bravado fading. "You're not going anywhere, Mr. Duggan," Martha said. "You're going to be our proof." They tied the three men's hands securely. "The wagon," Hostin Tso said. "It is strong. It will hold them, and it will hold us." Martha realized the plan. They weren't just going to tell the marshal in Prescott. They were going to deliver the criminals and the evidence. "Hitch the mules," Martha ordered. "Taji, come out, we're leaving." Taji scrambled from the stable and ran to Hostin Tso, burying his face in the man's tunic. The elder held him close. "No," Hostin Tso said to Martha. "Tazi does not go to the white man's town. He stays with us. He is the future of our people. But he gives you this." The elder slipped the leather pouch from Taji's neck and handed it to Martha. "This is your weapon. The map." "It's not enough," Martha said, a desperate, brilliant, terrible idea forming in her mind. "The map is their word against mine. I need Frank's proof." She looked at Duggan, a cold fire in her eyes. "The ledger. The one you stole from my cabin after you killed my husband. Where is it?" Duggan spat. "Go to hell." Martha pressed the warm barrel of the Winchester under his chin. "I'm already there." "Where is it?" Duggan's eyes wavered. "Higgins. It's at the ranch, in his safe." "Then," Martha said, looping a rope around Duggan's bonds, "that's our first stop." The plan was insane. It was suicide. And it was the only option. They couldn't go to Prescott. It was too far. Higgins would have a posse on them before they cleared the county line. They couldn't stay at the ranch. It was indefensible. The dam, Hostin Tso said, his eyes on the map. The spring that Higgins stole. It is on his land, yes, but at the edge of the canyon. The white law. Do they protect a thief? Sheriff Brody does, Martha said bitterly. He's on Higgins's payroll. Then we do not bring the law to Higgins, Hostin Tso said, a grim logic settling on his features. We bring Higgins to the law, and we bring the evidence. He turned to his men. You two, he said to the fastest runners, ride to Perdition's Fork. Find Sheriff Brody. Tell him the Coltrane widow has gone mad. Tell him she has captured Higgins' men and is attacking the Double H. Tell him to come to the dam. The runners looked at him, confused. He will arrest her, one said. Yes, Hostin Tso said. He will come, and he will bring Higgins. They will come to see the trap close, and they will walk into ours. The runners vanished. The rest of us, he said to Martha, we ride, we take the wagon, we take the prisoners. They loaded Duggan and the Galt brothers, bound and gagged, into the bed of the rebuilt wagon. They were Martha's insurance. You, Martha said to Duggan, you're going to tell me exactly where that safe is. They didn't take the road. They took the canyon, a route only the Navajo and Frank Coltrane knew. It was a brutal, jarring ride. The reinforced wagon, a miracle of Diné engineering held together. It scraped rocks, jolted over gullies, and forded the shallow, muddy trickle that was all Higgins had left of the creek. Hostin Tso and his men rode as outriders, their bows ready. After an hour of hard travel, they emerged on the southern rim of the basin, looking down on the sprawling Double H ranch house. It was a fortress of arrogance, built with stolen water. It's quiet, Martha said. He must be in town. Good, Hostin Tso replied. They left the wagon hidden. Martha, Hostin Tso, and two of his men, dragging a now terrified Lyle Duggan, stormed the ranch house. It was empty, save for a frightened cook who fled at the sight of them. The office, Martha demanded. Duggan, seeing no escape, led them to it. The safe was behind a heavy, ostentatious painting of a prized bull. The combination. Martha said the Winchester steady. Duggan recited the numbers. Martha's hands trembled as she worked the dial. The heavy door swung open, and there it was, Frank's ledger. She seized it, her eyes blurring with tears. She opened it. It was all there, Frank's meticulous notes, the water surveys, the Navajo map copied and annotated, and at the back a damning record of payments. L. Duggan, $100, rock slide. Sheriff Brody, $50, property line dispute. And a name she didn't recognize, Mr. Leland Tucson Land Office, $500. Clear title. It was a conspiracy from the ground up. We have it, she breathed. We have it all. And now they come. Hosteen Tso said his ear to the wind. From the direction of Petition's Fork, a dust cloud was rising. Fast. To the dam, Martha yelled. They piled back into the wagon, Duggan and his men now ballast. Martha took the reins, cracking the whip. The mules, sensing the urgency, flew. The rebuilt wagon careered across the open rangeland, heading for the narrow canyon that held the stolen water. It was a race. They reached the dam first. It was an ugly, monstrous thing, a wall of felled trees, rock, and packed earth choking the canyon. Behind it, a massive stagnant pool of water had formed. Below it, the creek bed was bone dry. Here, Hosteen Tso commanded. They took cover in the rocks above the dam, the wagon concealed in a cluster of pinon trees. They had the prisoners. They had the ledger. They had the high ground. The posse arrived. It was Sheriff Brody, his badge glinting, and 4 other men. And riding beside him on a fine black stallion was Bartholomew Bart Higgins. His face was purple with rage. Martha Coltrane, Brody bellowed, his voice echoing. You are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and inciting an Indian uprising. And for what are you under arrest, Sheriff? Martha's voice rang out from the rocks, clear and strong. Higgins scanned the rocks, his eyes landing on her. You're finished, Martha. Your savage friends can't help you now. Give me my men. They're right here, Mr. Higgins, Martha said. She shoved Lyle Duggan into the open. And they're witnesses to the murder of my husband. Higgins laughed. Your word against mine, you hysterical. Not just my word, Martha shouted. She held up the ledger. Frank Coltrane's word in his own hand. A ledger. Mr. Higgins detailing every dollar you paid. 100 to Duggan for the rock slide. 50 to Sheriff Brody to look the other way. 500 to Mr. Leland in Tucson to clear the title. The posse stopped. The other men looked at Brody. The sheriff's face had gone the color of ash. Higgins's smile vanished. He stared at the ledger. That's a lie, a forgery. Is it? Martha cried. Then why did I find it in your safe, Mr. Higgins? The combination to which your man here, she jabbed Duggan, gave me so willingly. Duggan, seeing his boss's murderous look, began to babble. He made me do it, Bart. She had the gun on me. I didn't. Shut up, you fool, Higgins roared. He drew his pistol. She's a liar. Kill them all. Higgins fired into the rocks, but he had forgotten Hosteen Tso. An arrow faster than the bullet sang through the air. It did not kill. It struck Higgins's gun hand. The pistol flew from his grasp as he screamed in pain. At the same instant, Hosteen Tso's men rose from the rocks. Arrows nocked, aimed at Brody and his stunned posse. The 3 men with Brody looked at their sheriff, then at Higgins, clutching his hand, then at the dozen Navajo warriors who had them cold. They dropped their guns. It's over, Brody, Martha said, walking into the open, the ledger in one hand, the Winchester in the other. You're a disgrace to the badge. Sheriff Brody, his hands shaking, unpinned the badge and let it fall into the dust. It was over. They brought Higgins, Duggan, and the Galt brothers back to Petition's Fork, trussed in the bed of the wagon. The dam was dismantled by Hosteen Tso's people before the sun set, and a joyous, muddy torrent of water surged down the dry creek bed for the first time in a year. The territorial marshal from Prescott came a week later. Armed with Frank's ledger and the testimony of Martha and Hosteen Tso, he cleaned out the valley. Higgins and his men were bound for the prison in Yuma. Mr. Leland in Tucson was arrested. The water rights for the basin were returned in a treaty to the joint stewardship of the Coltrane claim and the Diné. Martha stood on her porch, watching the Navajo people pack their camp. The rebuilt wagon stood in her yard, a monument of oak and rawhide. Hosteen Tso approached her. Taji held his hand. "You will stay?" Hosteen Tso asked. "This is my home," Martha said, looking at the land which was for the first time truly hers. "And Frank's." "He was a good man," the elder said. "You are good neighbors." Taji, still silent, stepped forward. He reached into a pouch at his own waist and pulled out a small carved piece of turquoise shaped like a waterbird. He pressed it into Martha's hand. She closed her bloody, scarred fingers around it. "Thank you, Taji," she whispered. He looked up at her, and for the first time he smiled. Hosteen Tso and his people moved on, disappearing back into the canyons that had kept them safe. But they were no longer strangers. They were allies. Martha Coltrane remained. She was no longer the desert widow. She was the guardian of the spring, and the wagon, which she never repaired to its original state, sat as a reminder that survival isn't just about grit. It's about the alliances you build and the debts you honor. It was a story the desert would remember, long after the men of greed were turned to dust. The story of Martha Coltrane and the rebuilt wagon is a testament to the fact that survival in the Old West wasn't just about grit, it was about alliance. It's a reminder that sometimes the hand you're told to fear is the only one that will pull you from the dust. The desert remembers. It remembers the greed of men like Bart Higgins and the quiet strength of Hosteen Tso. It remembers the night the Diné and a lone widow drew a line in the sand and built a future from the wreckage of the past. If this story of the real unvarnished West moved you, help us keep these histories alive. These are the tales that get left out of the history books. Hit that like button. It truly helps the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear a tale of true resilience, and most importantly, subscribe for more stories of the hidden heroes and forgotten battles that shaped the West. Your support is our lifeblood. Thank you for listening.